Before the world crowned the Beatles as untouchable legends, one powerful man quietly tried to shut the door on them. Ringo Starr later revealed a moment so tense it could have erased Beatlemania before it conquered America. This is the untold story of when Elvis Presley himself pushed to have the Beatles banned. History often remembers Elvis Presley as the king who ruled alone, but behind the crown lived deep fear of losing his throne. When the Beatles arrived, they did not just bring music, they brought a cultural storm that shook Elvis personally. Ringo Starr would later explain that what happened next was never meant to be public. In early 1964, the Beatles were exploding in America at a speed no artist had ever seen before. Crowds screamed, records broke, and television ratings went through the roof overnight. Elvis watched it all from a distance, silent but deeply unsettled. Ringo said Elvis felt something shift that year, something he had never felt before. For the first time, the spotlight was not waiting for him. It was chasing four young men from Liverpool instead. The Beatles did not come to replace Elvis, but the world framed it that way. Every newspaper compared them to him. Every headline asked if Elvis was finished. Ringo explained that Elvis took those comparisons personally. He was no longer just a singer, he was a symbol of American music. Seeing British boys dominate American charts felt like an invasion. Behind closed doors, Elvis reportedly spoke to powerful people. He had connections in Hollywood, television, and government circles. Those connections would soon be tested. Ringo later said they heard whispers before they ever heard facts. Radio stations acting strange. Venues suddenly nervous about hosting them. The Beatles were young, but they were not foolish. They felt the tension growing around them. Something bigger than music was happening. Elvis believed the Beatles were changing youth culture in a dangerous way. Long hair, rebellion, questioning authority. To him, it felt like chaos spreading fast. Ringo revealed that Elvis voiced concerns to the FBI. He suggested the Beatles were a threat to American values. Those words carried weight coming from Elvis Presley. The FBI already watched musicians closely during that era. Rock music was seen as risky and corrupting. Elvis knew exactly which buttons to push. Ringo said they never imagined Elvis would take it that far. They admired him deeply. He was their hero before they became famous. John Lennon loved Elvis growing up. Paul studied his records closely. George learned guitar from Elvis songs. Ringo said it felt like betrayal when they learned the truth. Not anger, but shock. Their idol was quietly working against them. Elvis was reportedly afraid of losing young fans. Teenagers were choosing Beatles haircuts over Elvis posters. That fear cut deeper than pride. Ringo explained that Elvis did not attack them publicly. Everything happened behind closed doors. That made it more dangerous. A public fight could be dismissed. Private pressure could end careers silently. The Beatles were suddenly vulnerable. The FBI opened files. Media scrutiny intensified. Conservative groups demanded action. Ringo recalled moments where tours felt uncertain. Security tightened. Venues hesitated. Yet Beatlemania kept growing. Fans screamed louder. Records sold faster. Elvis underestimated how deeply the world had already fallen in love. The wave was too strong to stop, but the attempt still left scars. Ringo said the band tried to stay calm. They focused on music, but the stress followed them everywhere. They were young men far from home, facing unseen enemies, one of them being their childhood hero. Ringo later admitted that Elvis's actions hurt him personally. It changed how he saw fame. It showed him how power truly worked. Success, he learned, attracts fear. Fear creates resistance. Resistance can come from unexpected places. The Beatles survived the pressure, but innocence was lost forever. They now knew the industry was not friendly. Years later, when they finally met Elvis face to face, tension filled the room. Smiles were polite but guarded. The truth hung in the air unspoken. Ringo said no one confronted Elvis directly. Some things were too heavy to say. Silence felt safer. Elvis never publicly admitted trying to stop them. The files remained buried for years. The story stayed quiet. But Ringo remembered everything. Time did not erase it. It only sharpened the lesson. The Beatles were not banned. But the attempt changed history. It proved even kings feel threatened. As the years moved forward, Ringo Starr began to look back at that strange moment in music history with clearer eyes and a calmer heart, not as a young drummer caught in the storm, but as a man who had lived long enough to understand why fear can change even the biggest legends. He explained that when people hear the name Elvis Presley, they imagine confidence, power, and total control, but behind that image was a man who felt the ground moving beneath his feet faster than he could react. The arrival of the Beatles did not just challenge Elvis's popularity, it challenged his identity. Ringo said that by the mid-1960s, Elvis was already surrounded by walls of protection, managers, advisors, and people who filtered reality before it ever reached him. That isolation made small threats feel massive and temporary trends feel permanent. When the Beatles took over American youth culture almost overnight, it felt to Elvis like history was erasing him while he was still alive. Ringo often pointed out that Elvis had been the first to shock parents, frighten authorities, and excite teenagers, so he understood better than anyone how powerful that influence could be. Seeing the Beatles sparked the same reactions, but on a global level, forced Elvis to relive his own rise while watching it happen to someone else. That comparison was painful. According to Ringo, Elvis truly believed he was protecting America in his own way. Rock music was already under suspicion, and British accents singing rebellious songs made it easier for critics to call it a threat. Elvis leaned into those fears instead of questioning them. Ringo explained that Elvis did not need to shout or protest publicly because his name alone opened doors. A quiet word to the right person carried more weight than any headline. That silent power is what made the situation dangerous. The Beatles sensed they were being watched more closely than other artists. Ringo remembered feeling tension during tours, interviews, and television appearances where one wrong sentence could be used against them. They were careful, but the pressure never fully disappeared. Instead of slowing down, the band poured everything into their music. Ringo said creativity became their escape and their defense. If they were being judged, they would give the world something unforgettable.